If you have ever loved, worked for, or been raised by a narcissist, you already know this truth in your bones. They don't fear your anger. They don't fear your tears. They don't even fear you leaving, not really, not at first. What they fear is your stillness, your calm. The moment you stop giving them a reaction to feed on, for years, maybe your whole life, you were the mirror they needed. Your hurt validated their power. Your confusion kept you close. Your hope that they'd change kept you patient, kept you quiet, kept you small. And it worked until it didn't. Something shifts the day you stop explaining yourself. The day you stop begging to be understood by someone who was never trying to understand you. The day your voice goes steady instead of shaking. That is the day the dynamic breaks. Not because you screamed louder, because you stopped screaming at all. And here's what nobody tells you. When that happens, they don't get gentler. They get louder. They escalate. They rewrite history. They tell everyone you've changed, you've gone cold, you've become someone else. Do you know what that really is? That's fear, wearing the mask of contempt. That's control slipping through their fingers, and them grabbing for anything to hold on to. You are not the villain in that story. You are the mirror that stopped reflecting what they needed to see. So when they go silent, you didn't lose. When they rage, you didn't provoke it. You simply stopped absorbing it. When they come back sweet and soft, promising things will be different. Remember, kindness that only shows up when you've drawn a line is not change. It's strategy. You don't need them to be scared of you. You don't need to win a war they started. What you need, what you deserve, is your own peace, built on your own terms, where no one else's moods decide your worth. The strongest thing you will ever do is not react, not chase, not explain. Just stand in your own truth, steady as stone, and let their storm pass through you without moving you an inch. That's not revenge. That's freedom. And freedom, my friend, is the one thing they were never able to give you because it was never theirs to give. It was always yours to take back. Silence has a way of feeling like the final blow. When someone who once had a hold over you suddenly goes quiet, every instinct in you might scream that you've lost, that you've pushed them away, that you've done something wrong. But listen closely, because this is one of the most misunderstood moments in the entire dynamic. That silence is not them walking away in peace. It is them standing still because the ground beneath their feet just moved and they don't know how to move with it. Think about how the pattern worked before. You'd express hurt and they'd twist it into your fault. You'd ask questions and they'd answer with more confusion than clarity. You'd pull back and they'd pull you in with just enough warmth to keep you hoping. Every part of that cycle depended on your response. Your tears were fuel. Your anger was fuel. Even your confusion was fuel because it kept you engaged, kept you trying, kept you tethered to a version of them that barely existed outside your own hope. So what happens when you stop supplying that fuel? What happens when you set a boundary and simply hold it without begging them to understand, without explaining yourself for the 10th time? without chasing their approval, the machine stalls. The script they'd rehearsed 1,000 times over has no next line because you didn't say the words they were counting on. You didn't cry the way you used to. You didn't fight the way they expected. You just stood there, quiet and unmoved, and that silence coming from you was louder than anything you could have shouted. Their silence in return isn't peace. It isn't respect. It is disorientation. It is someone recalculating, trying to figure out which old trick might still work on this new version of you. Give it time and watch. Often that silence breaks not into apology, but into testing. A message that seems random. A reappearance that seems casual. That's not coincidence. That's someone checking if the door you closed is really locked. So if you're sitting in that silence right now, feeling like you did something wrong, feeling like you should reach out and smooth things over, I want you to breathe and hold your ground. You did not fail. You did not lose them. You interrupted something that was never serving you in the first place. Let the silence sit. Let it stretch. Because on the other side of that silence isn't your defeat. It's the first real evidence that your boundary worked, that your voice mattered, and that you are no longer available to play a role you never auditioned for. There's a moment that catches people off guard every single time. You set a boundary, you stay calm, you finally stop bending yourself into shapes to keep the peace. And instead of relief on the other side, you get rage. Sudden, sharp, disproportionate rage. Mockery that cuts deeper than it should. Maybe even a smear campaign, where suddenly you're the one being painted as cold, unstable, ungrateful, cruel. And your first instinct is to shrink back, to wonder what you did to deserve this explosion. I need you to understand something clearly. That explosion was never about what you did. It was about what you stopped doing. For as long as the dynamic worked in their favor, calm was easy for them to perform. Charm was easy. Even patience on the surface was easy because they held the power, and power doesn't need to shout. But the instant that power gets questioned, the instant you stop absorbing blame that was never yours, stop apologizing for things you didn't do, stop shrinking to keep someone else comfortable, the mask slips. And what's underneath that mask has never been strength. It has always been fear. Rage is loud precisely because fear cannot afford to be quiet. Think about it. A person who is truly secure, truly in control, doesn't need to mock you into silence. They don't need to rewrite the story so you're the villain and they're the victim. They don't need an audience of mutual friends or family members to take their side. Someone secure can tolerate disagreement. Someone secure can hear no without detonating. So when you witness that detonation, what you're actually witnessing is someone who feels the ground shifting under them and has no tool to handle it except volume, except cruelty, except spectacle. This is why the timing matters so much. Notice when the anger arrives. It rarely comes out of nowhere. It comes right after you've done something that disrupted the old pattern. After you didn't chase, after you didn't cave, after you said the sentence you'd never dared to say before. That timing is the evidence. It tells you plainly that this rage isn't about your character. It's a reaction to losing control over you. So when it happens, and it likely will, don't let it convince you that you caused a catastrophe. You didn't break something that was working. You interrupted something that was working only for them. Let their anger be information instead of injury. Let it conform, rather than shake, the boundary you just built. Because the day someone's mask cracks in front of you is not the day you failed them. It's the day you stopped being small enough to keep it in place. Stand in that. Let it be proof, not punishment. There's a particular kind of hope that returns the moment someone who hurt you suddenly becomes warm again. After weeks of distance, after the silence, after maybe even the rage, they come back soft. Sweet messages, small gestures. Suddenly, they remember your birthday, they compliment something you said years ago, they seem present in a way they never were before. And your heart, tired from all the conflict, wants so badly to believe this is the moment things finally change. I need you to slow down here because this is one of the most dangerous turns in the entire cycle. Precisely because it doesn't feel dangerous. It feels like relief. Real change doesn't arrive only when you've pulled away. Real change is not a reaction to your distance. It's a decision that exists regardless of whether you're close or far, engaged or gone. If the warmth only shows up after you've created space, after you've stopped chasing, after you've started to look like you might actually be okay without them, that timing is telling you something important. It's telling you that the warmth isn't about missing you as a person. It's about missing the control they used to have over your attention. Think about what love bombing actually does. It doesn't ask you to trust slowly, rebuild carefully, or prove change over time. It floods you all at once. Intensity, attention, affection, so that your guard drops before your mind has time to catch up. It's designed to override the boundary you just built. Not because they want to understand why you built it, but because that boundary is inconvenient. It's designed to make you feel like the distance was the mistake, like you overreacted, like coming back is the reasonable, loving thing to do. And here's the part that stings the most. It often works, at least for a while, because you want it to be true. You want the good version of them to be the real one. You want to believe the growth is genuine. But watch closely what happens once you soften, once you let them back in, once the relationship resumes its old shape. Does the warmth stay? Or does it fade the moment they sense you're secured again? The moment the old patterns quietly return because the real work of change was never done. Only the performance of it? This is why distance deserves to be tested with time, not melted by a few kind words. Real change reveals itself in consistency, in accountability, without you having to ask for it, in patience with your caution instead of frustration at your caution. If someone truly wants to repair something, they won't need you to abandon your boundary to prove it. They'll respect the boundary while they earn their way back. So if the warmth returns fast and heavy, right when you finally found your footing. Don't mistake the flood for the foundation. Let time, not charm, be the judge of whether anything has actually changed. There is a kind of power that doesn't announce itself, doesn't perform, doesn't need anyone else to notice it. It simply exists, quiet and unshaken, and it is the single most disruptive thing you can bring into a dynamic built on your reactions. For so long, your emotions were the currency this relationship ran on. Your hurt gave them something to soothe or dismiss. Your anger gave them something to punish or mock. Your confusion gave them room to redefine reality until you doubted your own memory. Every single one of those reactions, no matter how painful for you, was oxygen for them. And the day you stop supplying that oxygen is the day the entire fire starts to die out. This is why calm unsettles a narcissist more than confrontation ever could. Confrontation still gives them something to work with, a fight to win, a story to spin, a version of you to paint as unstable or dramatic. But calm gives them nothing. Calm doesn't defend itself because it doesn't feel accused. Calm doesn't chase clarity because it isn't confused. Calm doesn't beg to be understood because it no longer needs their understanding to feel whole. When you respond to provocation with steadiness instead of collapse, you take away the one thing that made you predictable, and predictability was the foundation their control was built on. Notice what happens when you stop matching their intensity. They may escalate at first, testing whether louder will finally crack you the way it always used to. But when it doesn't, when you meet their storm with something quiet and immovable, something in the dynamic starts to shift. They begin circling, searching for the reaction they're used to getting, and not finding it. That search, that visible discomfort, is not a coincidence. It's confirmation that your calm has become the very thing they can't manipulate. This isn't about suppressing what you feel. It isn't about pretending you're unaffected when you're not. It's about no longer performing your pain for someone who only used it against you. It's about feeling your emotions fully in private, with people who actually deserve to witness them, while showing this person only the steadiness that no longer gives them a foothold. That distinction matters because calm born from numbness is just another wound in disguise, but calm born from genuine detachment is strength. Understand this clearly. Your steadiness is not coldness, and it is not cruelty. It is the boundary they cannot argue with, because there's nothing there to argue against. No tears to twist, no anger to weaponize, no confusion to exploit. Just a person who has quietly decided they will no longer be moved by chaos they didn't create. That is not a small thing. That is, in many ways, the most powerful thing you will ever do in this dynamic. Not raising your voice, not proving your point, not winning some final argument, but simply refusing to react the way you always used to, and watching how much that alone changes everything. You'll notice something strange after you've held a boundary for a while. Just when things seem to have settled, just when you think the storm has passed, a small provocation appears out of nowhere. a comment that stings a little more than it should, a joke at your expense in front of others, a sudden reminder of something you ask them not to bring up again. It feels random, almost petty, and you might find yourself wondering why they're bringing this up now, of all times, when things had finally gone quiet. But nothing about it is random. It is a test, quiet and deliberate, to see whether the boundary you built is still standing or whether it has started to crack under the weight of time. Understand how this works. Boundaries are unfamiliar territory for someone used to having none respected. For years, maybe your limits bent the moment they pushed hard enough, or waited long enough, or apologized just convincingly enough. So when a new boundary appears and actually holds, it doesn't register as final. It registers as unusual, almost unbelievable, something that surely can't last. And so they probe it. Not always with big gestures, but with small ones, testing the edges the way someone might press gently against a locked door just to see if it's really locked or if it was left ajar out of exhaustion. This is why the small moments matter so much more than they seem to. A minor boundary violation isn't really about the specific comment or behavior in front of you. It's a question wrapped inside something small. Does the old version of you still live in here somewhere? Will you let this one thing slide? Because it's not a big deal. Because you're tired of holding the line. Because it feels easier to overlook it than to address it again. Every time the answer is yes, even quietly, even just once, the door opens a little wider than before. But every time you notice the test and don't take the bait, every time you name it calmly or simply don't engage, or hold the same boundary you held the first time without needing to escalate or explain yourself all over again, something important happens. The test fails, and a boundary that survives repeated testing stops being treated like an obstacle to get around and starts being treated, however reluctantly, as a wall that isn't moving. That shift doesn't happen after one strong stand. It happens after many small ones held consistently without fanfare, without needing anyone to notice how hard it is. So if you feel provoked by something that seems too small to matter, don't dismiss your own reaction to it. Trust that instinct. Recognize it for what it is. Not an isolated incident, but a checkpoint in a much longer pattern. And answer it the same way each time, patiently, without needing to win the moment, because you're not trying to win an argument. You're proving, one quiet refusal at a time, that the rules really have changed, and that this time they're here to stay. There's a sentence that tends to arrive right when you least expect it, dressed up as indifference, but landing like a blow. I don't need you anyway. I was already done with this. You were never that important to me. It comes suddenly, often right after you've stopped chasing, stopped explaining, stopped shrinking yourself to keep the peace. And it's designed to hurt, designed to make you question whether you ever mattered at all. But listen carefully, because what sounds like strength in that moment is almost never strength. It's desperation wearing armor. Think about when these words actually surface. They rarely appear when things are calm, when the relationship still feels controllable, when you're still easy to predict and easy to pull back with a little warmth or a little guilt. They show up precisely when that control starts slipping, when you've held a boundary longer than expected, when you've stopped responding to the usual bait, when you've started to build a life, a peace, a version of yourself that doesn't revolve around their approval anymore. That's when the discard threat appears, not as a genuine goodbye, but as a last attempt to provoke a reaction, to see if the threat of losing you still has the power it once did. This is one of the cruelest tricks in the entire pattern, because it's built to exploit your empathy against you. If you've ever been the one holding a relationship together, the one reassuring, the one trying to prove your worth, then hearing, "I don't need you," cuts straight into that old wound. It tempts you to prove them wrong, to chase after them, to show them just how much you do matter, just how needed you actually are. And that reaction, that chase, is exactly what the threat was designed to produce. Not because they're walking away for good, but because they need you to walk toward them one more time on their terms, under their control. Notice, too, how often these discard threats aren't followed by actual distance. If someone truly didn't need you, truly didn't care, they wouldn't need to announce it. Silence would do that job on its own. But desperation isn't quiet. Desperation needs an audience. It needs a reaction. It needs you to feel small enough, scared enough, guilty enough to come running back and restore the balance of power that your steadiness had just disrupted. So when you hear those words, don't let them convince you that your presence never mattered. Let them tell you the opposite. Someone who is genuinely unaffected by your absence doesn't need to declare it. The declaration itself is the evidence. Evidence that something shifted, that your steadiness worked, that the old strategy of controlling you through fear of loss isn't landing the way it used to. You don't need to respond to prove your worth. You don't need to chase to show them what they're missing. Let the threat sit there unanswered. Let your calm silence be the only reply. Because the moment you stop needing them to need you, their desperate words lose every ounce of power they were counting on. There's a quiet trap hidden inside almost every version of this healing journey. And it sounds something like this. If I just hold my boundaries long enough, if I stay calm enough, if I become unshakable enough, eventually they'll change. Eventually they'll see what they lost. Eventually, they'll become the person I always hoped they were. And I need you to hear this clearly, because it might be the most important truth in the entire process. That was never the goal, and it was never supposed to be. Waiting for someone else to transform is not healing. It's just a longer, quieter version of the same waiting you've already done for years. Real healing has almost nothing to do with what the narcissist eventually does or doesn't do. It has nothing to do with whether they finally apologize, finally understand, finally become capable of the love or respect you deserved all along. Some people never get there. Some people spend their entire lives protecting the same defenses, repeating the same patterns, moving on to new people who haven't yet learned to see through them. If your peace depends on their transformation, you are still, in a very real sense, waiting on them to give you permission to be okay. And that permission was never theirs to give in the first place. What actually changes everything is not them. It's you, specifically, what you're willing to tolerate, excuse, explain away, or shrink yourself around. Healing looks like noticing manipulation the moment it starts, instead of 3 days later after you've already apologized for something that wasn't your fault. It looks like feeling the old pull to fix, to soothe, to over-explain, and choosing not to follow it, even though every old habit in your body wants to. It looks like grieving the version of them you hoped for, instead of continuing to negotiate with the version that actually exists. This shift means the goal was never to make them scared, was never to win some invisible battle, was never to prove a point loud enough that they'd finally have to admit they were wrong. Chasing that kind of victory keeps you tethered to them just as tightly as chasing their love did. The real victory, the only one that actually sets you free, is becoming someone whose peace no longer depends on their behavior at all. Someone their guilt trips don't land on. Someone their charm doesn't hook. Someone their rage doesn't shake. Not because you've hardened your heart, but because you've finally stopped handing them the parts of you that used to bend. So if you find yourself measuring your progress by whether they've noticed, whether they've changed, whether they finally seem sorry, gently bring yourself back. That was never the finish line. The finish line is a version of you who can hold a boundary without needing their approval of it, who can walk through their silence, their rage, their sudden warmth, their tests, and their threats without losing your own footing in any of it. That's not about them at all anymore. That's simply you, finally being free.